Paul set the table beautifully for our next speaker, Manohar Raju, who is the acting public defender. And as you know, the Public Defender's Office defends these people who Paul was just talking about, when all these laws get enforced and charged against them. And he's going to come up and tell us a little bit about that. So let me tell you a little bit about Paul Manohar before he does. Prior to being chosen by Mayor London Breed, to succeed Jeff Adachi, he worked for 11 years in the Public Defender's Office here in San Francisco, some of the time director of training, and then he became the manager of the office's felony division. And if you're an attorney, moving up to the felony division is, important, and it's prestigious. Before that, he worked at the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office for 7 years, and he did his undergraduate coursework at Columbia, has his master's degree in South Asian Studies from UC Berkeley. And he also went to Bolt Hall and got his law degree, and as a lawyer, I can tell you, if you go to Bolt, that's pretty impressive. You're a pretty smart cookie. He's a founding member of the Public Defenders for Racial Justice, and he's known for his expert litigation skills and passion for criminal justice reform. Mayor Breed made him our new public defender, and at that time she declared, "Mano has the experience, the commitment, and the vision to lead the Public Defender's Office and fight for those who need a voice, both in the courtroom and in the community." And to do that today, please give him a warm welcome. Manohar Raju.
Really appreciated Paul's comments, and I think what was refreshing about his comments that I heard in the beginning was we don't have a homeless issue, we have a housing issue. And I think one of the things I've learned as a public defender is how we frame issues means so much about defining what the solution to those issues will eventually be. And I also appreciated the beginning of your comments because you talked about how, where your homelessness came from. And I think a lot of times we have a tendency to put homeless people in a certain bracket as opposed to realizing that, I would say more than 50% of our clients have some form of insecure housing. And I have a really good friend of mine that I end up in a college program with after I finished my undergraduate degree. And whenever he comes to town, he's very successful, but he drives around Berkeley looking for his homeless brother because his brother's homeless, and just to find him, because even though he knows he's there, he can't really do much more than go see him, give him a couple bucks. And I think to the extent we frame homelessness as part of, it's not separate from any of us, that's vital. As far as the court system is concerned, the idea of even coming to court, the idea of being homeless and coming to court is very challenging because you may have a shopping cart with all your belongings. So what do you do with the cart when you have to actually show up in court if we're going to criminalize lying down in a certain area? And then your stuff gets stolen, and then you're back in a situation where what do you have to do? You may have to commit a petty theft or do something else to get back the basic resources that you needed that you lost when you went to court because of something that probably should have been criminalized to begin with. I want to talk a little bit about, continue to talk about language and ways of looking at representing people who are often homeless. We have a rule in our office, and we're committed to something called vertical representation, which means if someone comes in the courthouse door and represent them in a felony case, the first person that you see in court will be your attorney throughout, all the way through jury trial and verdict. So we've designed the office that way. So if you come into what's called an arraignment courtroom, we assign that attorney, and that attorney will stay with you because we think it's super important that every client knows who their attorney is and knows that they have one individual who's going to be fighting for them. And you're not getting handed off and wondering who's responsible for your case. The second thing we have a requirement of is that that person be seen within two days if they're in custody. So you're basically being seen by your advocate twice within 48 hours. When I came to the office, what they would call that initial meeting in the jail is the interview. And they call it an interview form. And when they made me the training director, I said, why are we calling it an interview? What does an interview mean? It's often, first of all, there's a power dynamic, or someone's trying to pull information from you. Why don't we call it a meeting instead of an interview? because an interview is, you're trying to get something for your purpose as opposed to a meeting where you're both trying to empower each other. And when I brought that up to the chief attorney at the time, who was Teresa Confessi, who's not a judge, now a judge, she said, yeah, that makes sense, let's change the meeting. Also, think about it, a lot of our clients may have been interrogated by the police. Now their attorney says, now I'm going to interview you. This is, wait, I just got interviewed by the police, now you're interviewing me. Why is everyone interviewing me? Why doesn't someone meet with me? Someone be on my side? And now still people will say interview, and every time that happens, I correct them. I say, no, it's meeting. Now, most of the people we've hired since I became training director don't say interview anymore. But it's just an example of how do you frame your relationship with someone that you are advocating for. Another concept, and I thought about that as I was walking down here. I was walking by, similar example that we just saw. There were these people dining in this nice restaurant, and there was a person who appeared to be homeless, who was struggling with getting down the street. His pants were falling off, and there's a lot going on with him. And a lot of people, when they're walking by, you're a little more on guard if someone appears to be a little unstable or, maybe worried, maybe clutch their purse a little tighter. Just make sure that you get through that area safely. A lot of our clients that are living on the streets have the same reaction all the time, and they may be suffering from complex traumas or PTSD, mental issues, addiction, etc. But there's another concept. Let's say that there's some sort of assault that ends up happening, and it's not PTSD, it's PTSE, persistent traumatic stressful environment. And there's a lot of our clients that are constantly living in a persistently traumatic, stressful environment. And I think that's a term that I actually got from a sociologist, but that you don't see in courtrooms almost at all, even though it is an empirical sociological reality for so many of our clients. So that if something, for example, if someone is living in the Tenderloin, seeing a lot of things happen, a knife on them, they're most of the time not carrying a knife because they're walking around thinking, who should I stab today? They're carrying a knife because they're actually in fear. Similarly, sometimes with perhaps a firearm, not that, any of us support, or not that many support people carrying firearms, but a lot of people who are carrying something like that are often carrying it out of fear. And I've actually called experts who say, listen, this weapon, whatever the weapon may be, they're praying in the morning that they won't have to use that weapon, and they pray when they got home that they didn't use that weapon. So I think these are some of the concepts that we should be incorporating into our analysis when something happens on the street. Another concept that's relevant to what we do in relation to what are sometimes disempowered clients is this concept of early responsibility. It's common for a judge or perhaps a prosecutor to say, listen, I think this person should take responsibility for what they did and plead guilty early on. Because if they plead guilty, that early acceptance of responsibility is a good sign. And going forward, because they accepted responsibility for this crime, even though a lot of them are not crimes, they're public health issues, then they'll be better off in the future. There's a lot of studies with young people and transitional age youth that what is something that actually benefits them as they navigate through life. It's having a few adults who actually care about you. Sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's a godparent, sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle, sometimes it's a teacher, a coach, whatever the case may be. A lot of people who end up being our clients often didn't have necessarily enough of those adults around in an engaged way. And after I did my first misdemeanor trial in Contra Costa County, I have a vivid memory of my boss at that time coming into my office. The client was acquitted, but that's beside the point in this case. What he said is someone should do a study on this concept of early acceptance of responsibility versus someone going to trial with a client and the effect of recidivism on that client after the end of those two different options. Because if you see someone in trial with you, they talk to the jurors, they try to figure out which can be fair. Maybe, if there's 60 jurors or so who might come into the courtroom. You give an impassioned opening statement, you cross-examine the witnesses, you put on your own witnesses, you do something called in limine motions to talk about what evidence comes out, and then you do a closing argument. Now you've sat there next to that client and fought for them for 7 hours, a whole morning session in court, whole afternoon session in court, the next day, the next day, the next day. And that client sees someone in their corner. And in our office, it might be also an investigator, a social worker, an intern, paralegal, in addition to the attorney who might be also assisting in that representation. But for that time when that trial's going on, you see someone fighting for you that whole time. Now, if you ask the clients who have been through a jury trial process versus the clients who spent that 2 to 3 minutes having a judge read you some plea form or having an attorney quickly explain to you a plea form, pleading guilty and walking out, versus the clients who sat next to someone who was really fighting for them afterwards, and you ask that client, listen, who do you feel more obligated to? What's more empowering for you going forward? Guarantee you over 90% of them are going to say, the attorney who fought for me in trial had a bigger impact on my life going forward. And that's something that we should really think about, like empowering, this concept of empowerment versus responsibility. And lastly, I just want to share a story that isn't necessarily connected to being a public defender, but a personal story. My partner has a colleague, and she said, whenever she gets her paycheck, there's one homeless individual that she sees, and she gives that person some money for her check every time, whether, I don't know how much it is, $10, $15. And my partner was like, that's a good idea, and she shared that with my son. And so whenever we would get off the freeway, and there's this one homeless person there, my son knows his name. Well, that's Ricardo. He says, make sure whenever we stop, he says hello to him, and we give him a few dollars. And and that's frankly something that I learned now from my son, which is he has a relationship with a particular homeless person who's homeless, and he knows his name. And so it's not just homelessness as an abstract concept, but he's got a relationship with a particular individual, and he feels a connection to him. He says hello to my son. I have another colleague when I was in Oakland who would, when we took the casual carpool into the city, when people gave money, he said, oh, that goes to, so-and-so, the guitar player who's homeless off this intersection. But again, it's connecting with a particular individual as opposed to just seeing this as a homeless issue. He's talking about that person. Because as my brother Paul said, we don't have a homeless issue, we have a housing issue. So that's just one other thing I wanted to talk about to sort of individualize things as opposed to think about groups of people. I think I have 1 more minute, but we're taking questions afterwards, right? Okay. So, experts, early acceptance. Yes, so I just think when we talk about the Housing Act of 1937, it's just super important that when we think about all the dynamics affecting us that we throw into the criminal legal system, we look at this in this context. We look at the Housing Act of 1937. We looked at segregation in the city. So when they talk about a gang injunction, we look at, why is everyone living in a certain area? What was the redlining going on to begin with? All these issues that we're addressing in the criminal legal system can't be addressed without having this historical understanding of structural racism, of division, of the housing crisis. And increasingly in courts, what I've encouraged people to do is to start calling community experts, start calling people from different communities, start calling sociologists, because anything that is viewed in a vacuum, which might be, a 2-3 minute occurrence. If you go back in history and go wider and look at things from much greater lens, you're actually doing a much more historically accurate analysis of what happened, as opposed to just breaking it down into just this, what happened on this day in this particular scenario. And that's what, as public defender, I'm trying to encourage people to bring more actually real experts into the courtroom so we can look at things in a broader context. And most important for us representing clients, one thing I encourage our attorneys to do is, independent of what the particular case is, spend time with their clients. All of our clients are way more than that particular incident that they've been arrested for. So spend time talking to them about other aspects of their life. Where did you go to high school? Who's your favorite godchild? Who's your favorite uncle? What kind of music do you listen to? As opposed to just defining people by this alleged violation. And when we do that, we can bring such a full representation into the courtroom, and it makes a much bigger, much more impact on the jury and for our clients. So thank you.